So last week I spoke to you guys about Magna RAM and memory compression software in the 90s, which attempted to increase the available RAM you had by compressing it and using other techniques to free up conventional memory under DOS and Windows. And a few people in the comments on YouTube and my Facebook group mentioned Doublespace and DriveSpace, which were fantastic utilities in the 90s, which aimed to double your hard disk space rather than your RAM, because obviously hard disks were expensive then and RAM was expensive. So if you could find a way to increase it without laying out for extra hardware, then you're a winner. Stack Electronics introduced Stacker in 1990, which effectively doubled your hard drive space using compression. And how compression works on a basic level is that, say you have a file with the word chicken throughout, chicken, 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 it would take that word and replace it with a shorter identifier, so that chicken, rather than taking up 7 characters, could take up 2, for example, and then that identifier would be put in the index next to the word chicken. And these compression disk utilities essentially got the entire hard disk and compressed it all into one file on the drive, and then hosted that file as your C drive. So when you accessed your hard drive, you were actually accessing this compression driver, which then spoke to the hard drive and compressed data and then decompressed it when it came back to you. Now, Microsoft latched onto this for DOS, and in DOS 6.0 they launched DoubleSpace, which was essentially the same as Stacker. And rather than developing the software from new, they licensed a program from Vertisoft, which kind of did the same thing and changed it a bit to integrate it better with the DOS command.com. So effectively, once you compressed your disk, you load into DOS. DOS would boot up the DoubleSpace driver before it even loaded the configsys, and you'd have more space. Now, this had a number of consequences. Obviously, it took a lot of processor time to compress and decompress the data, and when CPUs were slower, this could affect your performance quite a bit, you know, especially depending on the compression of the data. Another problem, especially in Doublespace, was it had a massive bug. Basically, there was a problem with fragmentation, and because a normal disk requires a specific amount of sectors as a minimum to store data, say 16 sectors, Doublespace didn't need this because it was storing the data in a file. But on heavily fragmented disks, it kind of ran out of real sectors because it wasn't using these sectors in the compressed file. It was compressing the files into a smaller area. So that led to an issue where your hard drive and your data could just be lost, which was a bit of a bummer. So in DOS 6.2, and the eagle-eyed of you might notice that I referred to DOS 6.1 in my last nostalgic discharge. DOS 6.1 doesn't exist. Microsoft jumped to 6.2 like they did with Windows 10 to sort of varnish over the crap. DOS 6.2 includes a revised edition of Doublespace, which included a fix for this issue. It also included fixes for other problems which occurred, such as some programs tried to interfere with the memory the Doublespace driver was sitting in, and that would crash out your system because your system wouldn't know what to do with the hard disk. So there was a utility brought in called DoubleGuard, which checked this memory space and made sure programs didn't interfere with it. There was also issues with Smart Drive, which was DOS's caching software, where when the DOS prompt reappeared, sometimes the data wouldn't be saved to disk because it was cached, and people who turned off their computer as soon as the DOS prompt appeared, because there was no shutdown procedure then, might lose some data and corrupt their disk. So Microsoft introduced something which flushed the cache before the command prompt reappeared. Stacker then filed for a lawsuit in DOS 6.21, and Microsoft had to stop shipping Doublespace, but it came back in DOS 6.22 as DriveSpace, which fixed all these problems, and it was the version I used on my computers because I had an 850 megabyte hard disk, which seemed quite big at the time. You know, this was 1995, I had a 486 DX250, but I ran out of space quite quickly, and this is sort of an era where application size was overtaking the hard disk space you had, and DriveSpace was a great option because it allowed me to increase my hard disk to over a gigabyte. We're not talking terabytes, we're talking gigabytes here. And it slowed the system down a bit, but I was willing to make the compromise. One of the problems was the DriveSpace driver did take up some conventional memory, so you had to play around with your batch file and your config.sys to load drivers high, a bit like MagnaRam and Quem and these compression utilities were trying to do, which I explained last week. So you had to manage that to make sure games like Space Hulk, which needed a lot of conventional memory, worked. But it was great. It's just another one of those DOS utilities, Windows utilities, which I loved because it just you were just pushing your system for all that it was worth, and I love doing that. I love just getting as much out of my system as possible without having to resort to hardware upgrades. It felt like I was achieving something, sort of learning something, and just optimizing it. You know, the satisfaction you get when you improve something. And that's what it felt like. And, you know, it put my system through a lot of pressure, and the hard disk eventually failed, I think. I don't know if that was related. It's probably because it's just a dodgy old hard disk. But that happened. I upgraded to Windows 95, and that included DriveSpace as utility as well, built into Windows itself. But because of it was DriveSpace 3, I think, by that point, and because of the additional abilities it brought into play, I think you could do like ultra compression of your memory, which increased processor time. But because processors were getting quicker then, that was okay. But because of these extra utilities and parts of the program, it used more conventional memory. So if you tried to boot DOS after using DriveSpace and Windows 95, you'd have a bit of problem loading some game. All these DOS and Windows problems in the 90s, bloody loved it. It was awesome. I'd spend ages poring over things like this, the DOS and Windows manual, reading about DriveSpace and DoubleSpace and working out if it would be effective and what I could do and what I could get the most of my system with. I love reading manuals like this. Absolutely amazing. But yeah, DriveSpace and DoubleSpace, another interesting point in DOS Windows architecture history. It's something which intrigues me as much as memory doubler software. All these optimization utilities, I love them. And this just brings back memories of those times again. I love it. I hope you do too.